of attacks on publishers, translators, and others associated with the satanic verses serves as a grave and stark reminder of the potential and very real dangers when writers put pen to paper, wherever they may be in the world. This attack took place 32 years after the legal decree, or fatwa, was first issued. We know this grievous attack is, however, only symptomatic of the deepening threat to freedom of expression, the growing legitimacy of the idea of offense being embedded through law and policy, the banning of books, the burgeoning intolerance impinging on the free and unfettered exchange of ideas, are hounding our right to critically engage and crippling lawful dissent. On the morning of the attack, and in a long list of examples of Rushdie's unmitigated support for persecuted writers everywhere, the author had been in conversations about assisting Ukrainian writers in need of safe refuge. The entire PEN International movement wishes Salman a full and speedy recovery. We look forward to him resuming his writing and having him here amongst us at next year's Congress, defending freedom and tolerance. My name is Romana Cacchioli, and I am Executive Director of PEN International.
Romana Cacchioli, PEN International Executive Director, just opened our Congress with this beautiful but bitter PEN's tradition of empty chair.
Bringing an empty chair as a reminder about those of us who couldn't join this gathering, being imprisoned, persecuted, or at risk. This is our gesture of remembrance.
So we officially open. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, dearest delegates,
and distinguished guests, to this year's 88th PEN International Congress.
Hosted by Swedish PEN
and PEN International.
And I'm delighted to introduce you Hanna Nordal, with whom I share this beautiful stage, the Managing Director of Swedish PEN.
And it is my great pleasure to introduce you to Olga Muka, Congress General Extraordinaire, PEN International, and my co-host for this coming evening. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much, whether you're following us online or if you are lucky to be here joining us in Uppsala. This year's Congress will provide you many opportunities to meet writers, readers, and activists from across the world.
The public program will take place throughout the week, on the screens, in bookstores, libraries, theaters, and culture houses.
And this is, of course, a very special event for our official delegates. The first in-person Congress after the pandemic break gathers over 200 delegates from about 100 centers from all around the globe, from Austria and Philippines and to Chile and Bolivia.
Our official program will include keynote speeches, public debates, literature readings, and many, many opportunities for the free word.
Today, we are inviting you to enjoy the welcome and keynote speeches with the following public panel.
We are holding this ceremony today in English, but French and Spanish translation of the speeches will be provided on the screen next to me.
And this Congress would not have been possible without the generous support of our partners.
I would like to express our deepest gratitude to Stiftelsen Natur och Kultur, Sida, Svenska institutet, Uppsala universitet, Uppsala kommun, Region Uppsala, Världsklass Uppsala, Kulturrådet, Svenska akademin, Annika och Gabriel Urwitz stiftelse, Kjell och Märta Beijers stiftelse, the Barbara Oscher Pro-Svezia Foundation, and our private donors.
I also want to take the opportunity to acknowledge the great work and commitment shown by all of our collaborating local partners and sisters organizations.
The Uppsala Writer Association, the Uppsala Art Museum, the Dag Hammarskjöld Foundation, the City Theatre, the Regina Theatre, Litteraturcentrum, Dagermanpriset, Icorn, Reporter utan gränser, Författarförbundet, Förläggarföreningen, the David Isaac Library.
And the amazing bookstores and libraries of Uppsala, and the list goes on and on. A big thank you to all of you.
And now it's time to begin, don't you think?
It is my pleasure to introduce our first speaker, representing the amazing host center of this year's Congress. He is a publishing manager, editor-in-chief, and the president of Swedish PEN. Give a warm welcome to Jesper Bengtsson.
Honorable PEN delegates, distinguished guest friends, I would like to start by welcoming you all to Swedish PEN and the 88th PEN Congress in Uppsala 2022. But I would like to start with an apology, actually. When I first introduced our wish to organize this Congress, it was in Manila in 2019. I presented, well, at that time we were supposed to have the Congress in 2020, and then it was supposed to be Oxford when PEN had its centennial the year after. And I presented Uppsala as slightly like Oxford, but less pretentious. But looking at this building, I realized that I was wrong. A little bit like Oxford, but equally pretentious. Either way, I cannot stress enough how happy I am that we are able to gather here today and how interesting and instructing the coming week will be. To listen to and participate in the conversations that will be held about conditions for literature and the challenges literature will face in a world that is increasingly characterized by authoritarianism and growing repression of free speech. All the more, this shows how important it is that we can finally meet physically for those conversations. After 2 years of digital meetings, we can finally meet to commemorate the centenary of PEN, as well as celebrate the 100th anniversary of Swedish PEN. Actually, the first documented Swedish PEN meeting was held on the 30th of September in 1922 in connection with a dinner for some 20 authors in Stockholm. So this Friday, 4 days ahead, we will have a new dinner to celebrate this. Hopefully, more people will attend. PEN was founded at a time when the world was recovering from the First World War, and one of the core principles of the organization was to rise above the nationalist propaganda that had characterized the period before and during the war. PEN wanted to counteract the mechanisms that created barriers between people. One of many sources of inspiration was the French writer Romain Rolland, and his idea that the world needed an international of the spirit. The authors should be free from, and the literature should look for a communication beyond the mindset that divide us from them. Today, unfortunately, the idea of an international of the spirit has once again become utopical. All over the world, we witness destructive nationalism, propaganda, and increasingly authoritarian systems stamping out any intellectual and free conversation. Since we last met for Congress, the world has gone through a pandemic, which many countries used as a free pass to increase control and surveillance. We have seen a military coup in Myanmar, the Taliban's recapture of Afghanistan, Lukashenko's increasingly oppressive regime, Russia's political austerity, and war on Ukraine. We have, over the past week, watched how the people of Iran once again rise against their oppressors, and how they once again are met with bullets and brutal force. And we have, horrified, witnessed the attack of Salman Rushdie, a shock to all of us, of course, and a reminder that threats against writers always has to be taken seriously. I think we all thought that the most immediate threat against Salman Rushdie was over, but it was not. In this time, in this situation, PEN is indispensable. In this time, we need to make sure that we are able to activate our network of authors and publishers in support of those who are forced to either flee from or face threats in their home countries. And our meeting here in Uppsala this week is a manifestation of this solidarity. Sweden has, in many ways, been a pioneer. Our first freedom of the press constitution was adopted already back in 1766. And although it was in place for only 6 years after our king decided to establish a new dictatorship, we like to brag about this and proclaim that we have the world's oldest constitution for freedom of the press. Nowadays, we are frequently ranked among the leading countries in almost every international index when it comes to freedom of expression. This does not mean that Sweden is free from problems. On the contrary, we face the same slippery slope that has characterized the global development in recent years. Sweden as well faces an increasing number of threats against writers and journalists. This applies not the least to women writers or writers from the country's minority groups, but it also applies to those writing about climate change and other environmental issues. Sweden as well has been marked by the new surveillance society. Over the last 10-15 years, we have introduced a series of new laws that make it possible to intercept citizens' mobile phones and data traffic, or for that matter, to set up cameras to monitor streets and squares. Technologies that might seem harmless in the hands of good-hearted Democrats, but fatal to freedom of expression if they are used by more authoritarian forces. In Sweden as well, we face the increasingly borderless ambition of countries like Turkey, Eritrea, or China. We have 2 Swedish cases of imprisonment in other countries. The first is the Swedish publisher Gui Minhai. For several years, he has been unjustly imprisoned in China, and China uses its propaganda against everyone who is working for his release, as well as anyone who dare to criticize the lack of democracy in China. When Swedish Pen in 2019, only a couple of months after the Manila Congress, awarded the Tucholsky Prize to Gui Minhai, the Chinese embassy in Stockholm replied that those responsible for giving him this prize should no longer feel safe. It was a direct threat. The second case is a Swedish journalist and writer, David Isaac. He has been imprisoned in his former homeland of Eritrea for 21 years. Actually 21 years just this week, I think. Without a trial, without any kind of court process. His only crime, he was working for an independent newspaper. These cases are important. They are important because we must show countries like China or Eritrea or Russia or Belarus or Myanmar or Iran that those who are imprisoned are not forgotten. That there are organizations and individuals who are ready to get involved, that we won't forget. This also underlines the importance of this Congress, that we can finally meet in person, discuss the conditions of freedom of expression, show that pen in one country never stands alone, that we are this network with global reach that we want to be. So, honorable PEN delegates, distinguished guests, friends, once again, welcome to the 88th PEN Congress in Uppsala. Welcome to yet another manifestation of the International of the Spirit. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jesper. A great manifestation indeed. I will now introduce our next speaker. Borders separate, books unite, he said yesterday. Burhan Sonmez, the person who unites both borders and books, prize-winning novelist and president of PEN International. Warmly welcome him to the stage.
Okay.
Good morning. Welcome to the Congress of PEN International at the beginning of its second century. That's also the centennial of Swedish PEN. Now we are in a time where, like everything else, names are corrupted and misused. Let's call things by their names. A poet cannot be called crazy just because she has gone beyond your reality. She is a free spirit, like Anne Sexton. A novelist cannot be declared a demon just because he wrote things that don't fit your opinion. He is a respected writer, like Salman Rushdie. A journalist cannot be called a foreign agent because he is revealing the facts. He is an independent journalist, like Dmitry Muratov. Just because someone with a different sexual orientation is not like you, they cannot be described as a deviant. They are an honorable person, like Oscar Wilde. Truth begins with names and words. For 100+1 year, we have been promoting this as defending freedom of expression for everyone, everywhere. We have been saving lives, thanks to your efforts, your solidarity, and your sublime spirit. Only last year, we undertook the biggest relocation operation of our history and brought to safety many writers and their families from Afghanistan, Belarus, Nicaragua, Uganda, and beyond. Now we are more organized and more effective with 150 pen centers in more than 100 countries. We help hundreds of authors every year. We take on their cases and establish a global network of solidarity with our committees and pen centers on different continents. While we had the power to rescue many people like Arthur Koestler or Wole Soyinka, there have been cases that our power was not enough, as we couldn't come to the help of Lorca in Spain in 1936. Federico Garcia Lorca was a poet. He still speaks to us in his poems and tells us, "If I die, leave the balcony open. The little boy is eating oranges. From my balcony, I can see him. The farmer is harvesting the wheat. From my balcony, I can hear him. If I die, leave the balcony open." I wish Lorca knew that our balcony is open. We have been leaving it open for a long time. From the balcony, we see Ukraine, Chiapas, Cuba, Armenia, Palestine, Yemen, Eritrea, India, Myanmar, and nowadays Iran and Kurdistan. And we see people of color, indigenous women, and children living in poverty. From the balcony, we see imprisoned writers and journalists. History is said to be the best teacher, but people don't seem to be the best students. In the 21st century, nationalism is rising again, erecting new walls between societies, and bigotry is becoming the favorite tool in responding to the problems of our time. Populist ideas are gaining ground in every continent, especially Europe. When we look at today's social media networks and the amount of information for propaganda, we see how the truth can be blurred and replaced by the invasion of fake news. Many people and institutions become a voluntary part of this process, spreading lies and conspiracy theories, and almost greedily destroying what we call truth. Today, we need information democracy. We have always emphasized that freedom of expression doesn't mean insulting others, but showing that other opinions are possible. If you don't agree with this, simply bring another opinion forward. No need to resort to hate speech or violence. When PEN International was founded in 1921, the ideals of its founders were simple. They wanted to establish cultural relationships in a world where hatred was dividing nations. Since then, we have been defending the mutual respect and dialogue of people. That's why the third paragraph of PEN International's charter states that Members of PEN should at all times use what influence they have in favor of good understanding and mutual respect between nations and people. They pledge themselves to do their utmost to dispel all hatreds and to champion the ideal of one humanity living in peace and equality in one world. This is our ultimate dream. One humanity living in peace and equality. This seemingly simple dream looks like a utopia in the strange world we live in. Let's remember Lorca's open balcony, from where we could see not only worrying incidents, but also beautiful and happy things. From the open balcony, we can see people dancing, lovers kissing, and workers returning home happy. We can see a world at peace, a world where everyone sings a song in their neighbor's language, and all writers are free. With the hope of making this view of the open balcony real, we work tirelessly. At a time when bad news is spreading all over the world and we are blinded by pessimistic views, I believe that our job is to raise hope. Literature is hope, and PEN International is the house of hope. We have completed our first century with honor and pride. I wish you a magnificent second century, and thanks to all of you for promoting and supporting this historic mission. Thank you.
Supporting this historical mission. This is it. Thank you, dear Burhan, our president, who has been elected at the Centenary Congress in 2021, and we fully expect from you mapping out our future centenary path, no less. Oh, he's ignoring me. So, back to historical mission. I know no man who can present PEN International history better than Carlos Tourné, our former centenary director. But here is the risk. He can never follow the timing. So we cheated a bit and asked him to record the video. Your attention at the screen.
Hello, I am Carlos Tourné, and I was last year the director of the PEN Centenary and the editor of the PEN Centenary book together with Jan Martens. See this picture. It was sent to us by Polish PEN. We see the delegates to the PEN International Congress in Warsaw in 1930 who went for a day of rafting on the Dunajec River in the middle of the Congress. It's the beautiful image of delegates embarking together for a century of debates, struggles, missions, translations. We loved this picture so much that it's a double page at the beginning of the book. This book, PEN International, An Illustrated History. An Illustrated History, the book we have produced, has 320 full color pages and more than 500 pictures, letters, documents, posters, maps. Thanks to each PEN center who has been sending material for the book's production. And thanks to every person and institution who has supported the book's production, starting with the late Mexican PEN president, Alin Davidov-Mizrachi. And thanks to the Harry Ransom Center at the University of Austin, Texas, which preserves the archives of PEN International. The book is the product of two essential partnerships of PEN International. PEN has partnered with the Writers and Free Expression Project. The three leading researchers of the project are Rachel Potter, Peter MacDonald, and Letizia Zecchini, and they are authors of the PEN book. On the PEN side, Jennifer Clement, president of PEN International from 2015 until last year, Ginebra Vale, the archives collection manager, and myself, we are authors of the book. We had to face as authors two challenges at the beginning. First challenge, how to show the reader the intertwining of the history of Congress's resolutions, campaigns, and missions on one side, and the faces of the organizations, the individuals who have shaped PEN International. This is why we have created a permanent dialogue between cases and the life of PEN in the pages of the book. See the contents of the book. Each black line is a PEN story. Each red line is a PEN case. Let's explore with one example. The defense of the Tibetan language by the Dalai Lama and PEN Tibet, the campaign by English Pen and Pen America against the closing of Egunkaria, the only newspaper in the Basque language, or the constant defense of the linguistic rights of the Kurds, those stories are intertwined with the cases of Kunchok Tsepel Gopitsang, Marcello Tamendi, and Zena Dogan. Our history is divided in two blocks in the book. The first block is the origins of Pen, with the first dinner in London on 5th October 21, the first London Congress in 23, then the Congress in Brussels with the foundations of the Pen Charter, the Congress in Oslo, in Warsaw in 1930. We then moved to the major debates of the 1930s, the book burning in Germany during the Nazis, the 1933 Dubrovnik Congress, the 1936 Buenos Aires Congress, the Pen Refugee Fund supporting writers in London, the Congress in Stockholm and Copenhagen after the World War with the foundations of the new Pen Charter and the partnership with UNESCO. This part ends with the moving map of Pen in 1945, including the small map of London in 43 with 8 Pen centers in exile: Pen Germany, Austria, Catalonia, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Norway, Poland, and Yiddish Pen. Then comes the second block, divided into 5 sections: writers in exile, writers in prison, translation and linguistic rights, writers for peace, and women writers. In each section, we go back in time to the origins of Pen and travel across decades to reach the present. So, the Writers in Exile chapter starts with the first Pen center in exile, German Pen Abroad, with offices in London's Oxford Street. The chapter explores, among others, Cuban Pen in exile, Vietnamese Pen in exile, and it ends with the last center officially in exile, Pen Eritrea. The chapter about writers in prison starts with our first 4 cases in the 1930s: Jacques Roumain, Ludwig Renn, Federico García Lorca, and Arthur Koestler. Then we explore the creation of the Writers in Prison Committee in 1960, the evolution of the case list, the Pen missions in Turkey, Peru, Mexico, the Salman Rushdie affair, the work at the United Nations Human Rights Council. We end this chapter with Swedish Pen's Tucholsky Prize to Gui Minhai and the Minister of Culture of Sweden defying the Chinese ambassador when delivering the award to Gui Minhai. The chapter about translation and linguistic rights starts with the 1928 Congress in Oslo, where delegates decided that Pen centers would be defined according not to state boundaries, but to literary and cultural ground. We explore the impact of the 1996 Universal Declaration of Linguistic Rights and the creation of Pen Chiapas Pluricultural, and we end the chapter with the persecution of the Uyghur culture in China, with the cases of Ilham Tohti and Rahile Dawood. The chapter about Writers for Peace devotes several pages to the extraordinary role of the committee in supporting writers besieged in Sarajevo in the 1990s. It explores the creation of Pen Sierra Leone, the role of Pen Norway in the founding of Afghan Pen, Pen Mali as an actor of the peace process, and it highlights the importance of the 2017 Pen International Congress in Lviv and the case of Oleg Sentsov. The chapter about women writers explores the creation of the Women Writers Committee after the conflict of the Pen International Congress in New York in '86, the election of Jennifer Clement as the first woman president in 2015, and the drafting and promotion of Pen's Women Manifesto. We cross the whole century of Pen to reach this map at the end of the book. Pen in 2021, 150 centers in the 5 continents, from the first one, English Pen, to the last ones, Pen Greece, Pen Chiapas, Pen Quechua. The work closes with the manifestos of Pen, with the image of the largest ever mission of Pen in Silivri prison in Istanbul in January 2017, with 4 international presidents, Jennifer Clement, Johnston Soul, Per Wadsberg, Burhan Sonmez, and delegates from 13 Pen centers. More than 150 journalists were imprisoned at Silivri at the time, and they knew we were there, asking for them to be liberated. Closing the book with this image is a simple way of saying that after a century, we continue to be on a mission at the service of our imprisoned colleagues, fighting the unending struggle for freedom of expression. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carles Torner. Thank you. Thank you so much for this extraordinary publication, providing us with intriguing testimonies, insights into the rich history of Pen. And a Swedish version of this book will be available soon, translated by Ola Larsmo and published by Kaunis Olsson.
And it calls for one more round of applause.
Yes.
But at the same time, as we are gathering here to celebrate past achievements, we are directing our attention to what comes next. What are the future challenges we are facing?
We are going to spend the next couple of days together unpacking some of the responses to that question. And to start off, it is our great privilege to welcome our keynote speaker.
Dr. Siri Hustvedt is a novelist and scholar whose body of work spans over disciplines and genres.
She has for a long time been a strong voice for the issues of pen, in recent times manifested by the work of Writers Against Trump and Writers for Democracy.
Dear audience, please join us in applause to welcome Dr. Siri Hustvedt, who will give this year's keynote speech under the headline, Power of Words.
That's it. There's a Norwegian word that came to mind when I saw this place yesterday, and it's høytidelig. Very fancy. As my friend Salman Rushdie recovers from grievous wounds that have forever changed his life, a life that has already long been shaped by that monster ideological purity, I would like to open with a sentence from his memoir, Joseph Anton. He is writing about himself, but it serves as an epigraph for my own argument, which is founded on pluralism. Quote, "The migrated self became inevitably heterogeneous rather than homogeneous, multiple rather than singular, responding to more than one way of being, more than averagely mixed up," end quote. Every day, we see the power of the written word to sway, infect, and prod people to belief and action. Action that includes murder and attempted murder. Whether it's a phrase emblazoned on a TikTok video, a political slogan, an advertisement, a news story, real or fake, a conspiracy narrative, a scholarly or scientific paper, a best-selling novel, or a sentimental memoir, written words, phrases, and stories are contagious. They are instruments and sometimes weapons for ideas, prejudices, and collective movements of all kinds. They both construct and exploit human feeling to forge explanations for crises, real and imagined. Pen stands for free expression. But what exactly do these words mean when fictions circulate the globe as truths, when racism, xenophobia, and misogyny are embraced as righteous moral causes, when written threats, intimidation, and cruel mockery of others have become popular online sports? Surely these are all examples of free expression, driven by passionate feeling and belief. Although hypocrisy, Machiavellianism, and cynical manipulation also hide beneath the free speech banner, many people who profess ideas I deplore are sincere. Their roiling emotions have found answers in words, often about how bad things are and who is responsible. Despite the positivist worship of facts, A text that moves its reader is far more persuasive than a cold recitation of data in a policy paper. The incisive, arousing slogan or well-told story that brings the reader close to the particular dramas of particular people in a particular place, real or fictional, will leave an impression no spreadsheet can match. To borrow from neuroscience research, emotion consolidates memory. There is evidence of this even at the molecular level. We remember what we feel strongly about. Long after the details of a book have faded, we often recall the emotions that accompanied the story. Reading is not a disembodied act. It is not the application of paralyzed dictionary meanings to symbols on the page, an act of computational cognition exercised by the literate. Written works are animated by the living body of a reader in a situation that is uniquely hers, her language, her country, her position in the social hierarchy, her childhood experiences, education, cultural biases, illnesses, and past and present moods all affect her reading of a given text. Before a baby can speak, he is caught up in emotionally charged proto-conversations or wordless dialogues with his parent or caretaker. Sensual musical exchanges which are already enveloped in the sounds and gestures of a particular cultural reality. Empirical studies that use micro-analyses of films of mothers and infants, referred to as dyads, in face-to-face interaction have shown cultural variations in the expressions, voice pitch, gestures, and rhythmic style that take place between them. These encounters acquire a recognizable form for the baby through repetitions that become predictable rituals: feeding, playing games, bathing, going to sleep, each of which has a beginning, a middle, and an end of bodily experienced meanings. The late infant researcher Daniel Stern called this arc of affects the pre-narrative envelope, story form in the making. Stories are for others. They happen between people. Every culture tells stories, but the stories are as diverse as the languages that bear them, and their meanings are rooted in embodied emotive feeling. Emotions do not come prepackaged in categories with convenient labels attached: love, hate, envy, rage. The idea that feeling can be neatly categorized is a legacy of reductionist Western science that has imagined the human being as a machine with discrete parts, including the wheels and gears that produce specific universal emotions, or conversely, as a floating mind somehow connected to an unknowing material body. Although a continuum from pain to pleasure is part of mammalian life, how we identify feeling is culturally coded. As the scientist Manos Tsakiris pointed out in an essay for Aeon, Politics is Visceral, people do not always know what they want in the political realm because they might not know what they feel. But feelings are nevertheless crucial to thought and action. Our emotions are literally visceral, generated from our heart, lungs, guts, and hormonal systems, and human beings must maintain a dynamic equilibrium, homeostasis, to survive. Is a bad feeling anger, resentment, bitterness, or jealousy? How do we know? What exactly is the relation between the radicalized mass shooter's manifesto posted online and his murderous act? Is it a projection onto the other? Is it justification through an ideological community? Is it grandiosity or a desperate need to inflate the puny, denigrated self? Aren't the words chosen to describe a feeling dependent on a language and the wider collective reality used to decipher it? Once we have gained the ability to speak and then become literate, the inchoate feelings of human beings are endlessly seeking explanations in words. But those words gain meaning only in context. Every writer has struggled with lines, sentences, and paragraphs, and with the form of a poem or novel or essay as a whole to express what evades articulation. Writing is not phenomenology. The immediacy of what Edmund Husserl called Leib, the lived body, escapes the written word. Although the writer may work hard to represent it in those markings on the page. As writers, we engage in the dynamic rhythms of remembered feelings mediated through the symbols of our languages, cultures, and their power structures. The divisions we make among these strata of experience are convenient, not real. Our work is biological, psychological, and sociological all at once. Words are learned, but they become biological realities in plastic brain tissue and are part of conscious and unconscious memory. They are psychological entities whose meaning is dependent on our past experience in the world with others, which create expectations that shape our perceptions. Literacy alters the brain and alters perception. A neat example I have cited before is that the habits of literacy affect our views of time as a spatial concept. If your written language moves from left to right on the page, you construct a timeline that imagines the future to the right. The timelines of Arabic and Hebrew readers are exactly reversed. The verticality of Mandarin affects its speaker's image of time. The pre-literate child and the illiterate adult do not understand time as something that can be envisioned as movement in space. All freedom of expression is constricted by automatic, often unconscious biases that have cultural meanings. Whether the future is to the right or the left may not have dire consequences in a given society. But it's easy to see how it might lead to misunderstandings in a translation. Gender is also envisioned spatially as hierarchy in many places. Masculinity is above, femininity below. Is the girl who censors her own writing, who lives in fear of male authority figures, who have continually belittled her intellect and rewarded docile, polite behavior, free to express herself? In 1970, I was 15 years old. I bought an anthology edited by Robin Morgan called Sisterhood is Powerful, about the women's liberation movement. The essays in the book gave a shape and voice to a feeling. which I had never identified as anger, but rather a form of unarticulated woundedness. Did the words in the book trigger my anger, or had I repressed the emotion and then discovered it? My youthful conversion to feminism was surely influenced by the political zeitgeist. But the small town where I grew up, my family story, my middle-class status, my whiteness in the United States, my proclivity to severe headaches, my hurt feelings, may all have influenced my receptivity to the ideas in a book, which changed my life. I've read many books on feminism since. It is by no means a topic of consensus. From them, I have continued to refine and rethink my position, which has never stopped evolving. The journey of deep reading is inevitably a journey of becoming plural, of becoming a person inhabited by thousands of voices that sing from multiple perspectives, a cacophony. Without tolerance for perspectival pluralism, there can be no democracy or anything like it. But its power is waning around the world, and the resounding question is, what can we as writers do? The role of the written word is not incidental to the threat of authoritarianism. Although words serve as masks for authoritarian ideologies, they are also vehicles of liberation from them. Words disambiguate bodily affects. I've lost my place and I am finding it. Words disambiguate bodily affects by naming them and creating stories. All narratives are selective. They make sense of temporal existence by linking events as causal. This happened, and because it happened, that happened. Stories create a rhythmic order from the glut of stimuli we all experience. It is somewhat ironic that the novel, which may be the most democratic literary form of all, with its many voices and continual conflict, a genre which, as M.M. Bakhtin argued, is made of dynamic polyphony, is losing its cultural role as a form of knowledge, certainly in the United States, where it limps along as a feminine, soft, innocuous genre, often celebrated most when it echoes cultural platitudes. Notice that in the massive media coverage of the attack on Salman Rushdie, there has been little, if any, direct attention to that polyphonic, buoyant, ironic, fiercely intelligent, intermittently hilarious novel, The Satanic Verses. We are bludgeoned by simple slogans and phrases, political, commercial, or just catchy. The most effective ones seem to articulate a shared emotional atmosphere. The metaphor viral is apt. Whether the contagious signs signify a collective feeling of hatred, dread, or joyous social unity, they focus the unfocused and answer a need for clarity and predictability. Although the internet has greatly accelerated the spread of pithy phrases, and algorithms are designed to excite people by showing them content of increasing effective force, often violent, the phenomenon is hardly new. History is instructive when it comes to how meaning shifts according to perspective and context. The Nazi phrase Blut und Boden, blood and soil, was a rallying cry, chanted at rallies and inscribed on propaganda posters. Although admittedly vague, the phrase helped disseminate the racist, masculinist ideology of the Reich, which manufactured fictional enemies and cultivated a fantasy of a static, authentic Aryan identity, which sprouted from the German earth. Constructing any identity with absolute borders leads to brutality. In Culture and Imperialism, Edward Said rejects all essential identities. Quote, "If at the onset we acknowledge the massively complex histories and of special but nevertheless overlapping experiences of women, of Westerners, of blacks, of national states and cultures, there is no particular intellectual reason for granting each and all of them an ideal and essentially separate status," end quote. In other words, inventing a box that holds an essential, pure identity is a fool's errand that defies the hybrid, shifting reality of human history and the complex evolution of various cultures in and through other cultures. The Nazis designated Jews, Roma, Sinti, the mentally and physically disabled, homosexuals, and others as not us, as impurity and pollution. Blood and Soil reappeared in the anti-Semitic chants at the Unite the Right demonstrations in Charlottesville, Virginia, in the United States in 2017. But Nazi propaganda also influenced Hindu nationalism in India as it constructed a Hindu majoritarian identity against the Muslim minority by promoting an Aryan connection between National Socialism and Hindutva, which includes a culturally specific reinvention of blood and soil. An imaginary idea of Nordic racial purity metamorphosed into a social religious purity, positing another religion as contaminated enemy. The influence went both ways. In her 1958 work, The Lightning and the Sun, Savitri Devi, née Maximiana Portas, a French writer, devoted National Socialist, vegetarian, and animal rights activist, claimed Hitler was a reincarnation of the god Vishnu. Devi remains an inspiring voice for the far right around the world. In my country, many articles have been written about what Make America Great Again, now shortened to MAGA and sometimes Ultra MAGA, actually means. Just as Blut und Boden requires an understanding of blood as code for race, without the context of white supremacy, the meaning of Make America Great Again is foggy. Again? Most commentators do not look beyond the borders of the US. But the echo of fascist propaganda, which turned on the eugenic science of fixed racial identities and their concomitant characters, lurks under again. The nostalgic longing for a mythical era of lost greatness is far more effective as propaganda than power to white men, which is surely one of its meanings. Although some Trump supporters would admit to overt racism and misogyny, many would not. MAGA is an emotionally potent sign of resistance to change, and the inclusion of women, non-whites, immigrants, and gender non-conforming people among those who have a right to legitimate power. The slogan is obscure enough to unfold multiple highly emotional longings that turn feelings once experienced as shame into pride. In light of history, it is no surprise that Trump has a following among Hindu nationalists, or that Narendra Modi's language resembles the MAGA drumbeat. I'm going to massacre the Portuguese, but bear with me. A luta continua, vitória é certa means the struggle continues, victory is certain in Portuguese. This phrase has also disrupted borders, but as a slogan of resistance, solidarity, and hope. In 1967, after 3 years of war against colonial Portuguese control, Eduardo Mondlane, leader of the Mozambican Liberation Front, Frelimo, rallied his followers with these words, using the language of the colonialists. Often shortened to a luta continua or just a luta, the phrase has long outlived Mondlane as a call for radical change. The country's first president, Samora Machel, popularized it in speeches and marches. It became a song performed by the South African singer Miriam Makeba in 1975 and was adopted as a cry by anti-apartheid protesters. In 1976, Robert van Lierop took the phrase as the title of his film about the Mozambican guerrillas. The son of a father from Suriname and a mother from the Virgin Islands, van Lierop grew up in New York City, became a lawyer, diplomat, activist, and filmmaker. A luta continua was used by Nigerian activists protesting the annulment of presidential elections in 1993, and in 2011, LGBTQ activists in Uganda adopted it as a sign of solidarity against persecution. It is now a hashtag for the Nigerian youth movement opposing SARS, the country's brutal special police. A luta continua exploded linguistic and geographical borders to become a phrase for various causes. Knowledge of Portuguese, not required. Words are shot through with power relations, social conventions, and long, circuitous histories of shifting meanings, which both produce and play on the fluctuating weather of human emotion and its contagions. The media mantra that if facts replace the fictions of misinformation, we will find our path to the truth in a post-truth world is naive at best. In The Origins of Totalitarianism, Hannah Arendt argues that propaganda is effective because, quote, what convinces masses are not facts, and not even invented facts, but only the consistency of the system of which they are presumably part, end quote. For Arendt, the seduction of totalitarianism is an imaginary completeness which thrives on, quote, an escape into fiction from coincidence into consistency, end quote. To which I add the emotional component. Consistency and predictability make human beings feel safe and give us an illusion of control. This is the pleasure of the fairy tale. We all long for a story with a happy ending we know is coming. Conspiracy narratives offer both completeness, there is an answer to everything, and clean incisions between good and evil characters, the pure and the impure. The mixed and ambiguous are intolerable. Contrary to common wisdom, not only the ignorant and uneducated fall prey to these stories, they often draw on facts and have a logic, which involve unearthing connections and finding patterns that reveal a larger, coherent system. By clinging to a narrative with a predictable form, the person and the tribe to which he now belongs can exercise and project internal malaise, confusion, and bad feeling into malevolent others. Witches, Jews, Muslims, blacks, apostates, and criminal shadowy elites. Facts exist, of course. The Flat Earth Society has passionate adherents, but it remains a fact that we live on a globe. Fictions about vaccines have spread in many countries, but their meanings are often linked to local experience. Government-sponsored forced sterilization or brutal medical experiments in the past leave their traces in collective suspicion, which find explication in circulating stories that explain a nameless anxiety. Neoliberal ideology, which has reduced human experience to a bloated, isolated, consuming me, or the self as brand, has also played its part in undermining vaccine efforts by erasing the truth of our fragile interdependence as a species and our reliance on ecosystems we have been ruthlessly destroying. The lie of absolute individual autonomy, inevitably accompanied by masculine swagger, fed by governments and corporations, can be murderous in its effects. It survives on what the sociologist Pierre Bourdieu called symbolic violence, the invisible enforcement of societal structures with the acquiescence of the victims. Words are principal carriers of symbolic violence. Unfortunately, in light of crude discussions in my own country, I need to emphasize that Bourdieu is specific. Symbolic violence is not literal violence. It does not inflict knife or gunshot wounds. It is an invisible ideological consensus that reifies the status quo. The neoliberal lie crosses national, class, and ethnic borders. With hard work, determination, and faith in me alone, I can triumph over all obstacles and become successful, rich, and famous. Facts participate in symbolic violence. Factually accurate mainstream journalism is regularly skewed by cultural biases that parade as objectivity or neutrality. I take examples close to home. The New York Times reported on the Holocaust in its back pages, only rarely using the word Jew. The Jewish-owned newspaper did not deem the liberation of the death camps worthy of its front page. The same newspaper ran more articles on Hillary Clinton's email non-scandal than on the policies of either candidate, joining the rampant misogyny which characterized the 2016 US election. In 2014, when a police officer fatally shot an unarmed 18-year-old Michael Brown 6 times in Ferguson, Missouri, the paper carried an article about the deceased, which declared him no angel. The journalist who wrote the piece is Black, but the ensuing media controversy turned on the racist assumption of Black criminality. In the United States, white boys drinking, dabbling with drugs, and shoplifting are regularly forgiven as adolescent mischief or high spirits. A black boy gets no such slack. Attention to a female rape victim's clothing or her degree of inebriation are similar ways of shifting culpability from perpetrator to victim. In a 2019 paper published in the International Journal of Press Politics, Danielle Brown and Summer Harlow surveyed the mainstream media landscape. Quote, "Scholars have found that structural and organizational biases built into the norms and routines of traditional journalism have contributed to consistently detected press patterns that marginalize and delegitimize social movements," end quote. Such prejudices are hardly limited to the United States. How to tell the story is the crucial question. Facts can lie. Facts are useless without context, interpretation, and historical narratives. Media thrive on social stereotypes, born of essentialist categories and treated as natural kinds. Stereotypes are used to illuminate an individual's or an entire movement's actions. The convention of the news article also rests on the arrogant presumption that a few conversations and verbatim quotes from the family members of a dead boy can tell the story of a young man's life, or that a brief chat with officials or policemen at a volatile demonstration, perhaps combined with a few comments from a random protester in the street, will provide balanced coverage of the scene. These news formulas debase and cheapen actual complexity, variety, and depth of individual and collective experience. Believe the science is another slogan of recent coinage used to combat populist hostility toward climate science and anti-vaccine propaganda. While urgent action must be taken to reverse the disastrous course of the planet, and I am deeply impressed with messenger RNA vaccines and wish them on everyone in the world who can tolerate them. The idea that science is a monolithic entity that harbors truth is a dubious proposition. Eugenics, which reached its zenith in the Holocaust, was not regarded as pseudoscience, but as science. It was ascendant in many countries, but the United States led the way. Its sterilization laws were models for Nazi policy. Eugenics was intimately connected with the fledgling discipline of statistics, and many of its ideas, which turned on genetic determinism, are alive and well today in disciplines such as behavioral genetics and evolutionary psychology. Countless science papers on the link between genes and intelligence and genes and criminality are published every year. Their ideology hidden behind complex statistical maneuvers and quantification. Despite the fact that IQ tests were developed as eugenic tools, and years of research have shown the folly of quantifying intelligence, supposedly inborn to a single number, the papers flourish. A 2019 paper in Frontiers of Neuroscience insists IQ predicts life outcomes. Class, gender, and race are not mentioned. Data is never neutral. It is collected by human beings and rests on disciplinary paradigms that often go unexamined. Algorithms are infected with human perceptions, which include racism, misogyny, and xenophobia. My point is not that facts play no role in our understanding of the world, or that every media article or all of science is hopelessly flawed. That's not it. But rather that we are all vulnerable to the power of words, accompanied by impressive numbers and charts, for example, or texts that confirm what we already believe, or words that touch on unconscious stereotypes that skew our perceptions. Nor is emotion or passion, often associated with the low body as distinct from the high mind, the enemy of thought, as it has often been construed in Western philosophy. There is no thought without feeling, and attempts to purify language of emotional taint is a legacy of a rationalist tradition that cut human beings in two, mind and body, and also cut the human being from the natural world. The pandemic should have made the truth that we are of nature obvious, and that drawing lines between person and environment is false. I have long felt that literature has shaken up and still shakes up the preordained categories of a given culture. At best, it allows a reader to see anew, to enter the lives of unknown others, listen to foreign melodies, and walk down streets never traveled before, to become not one, but many. While reading, we can live in another consciousness, can free ourselves from the limits of our own internal narrators. Books can liberate us from strangling taxonomies into which we were born and replace them with a dynamic pluralism. Poems, novels, essays, philosophies, and histories can be as hackneyed and stupid as any other form of writing. But I suspect that all of us here have been transformed by books. The titles of those books are different, of course, because that intimate encounter between text and reader is an intersubjective one that blooms in the social space between them. Although the words on a page are fixed, their meanings are not. They are made and remade in the embodied realities of particular readers. In my work as a volunteer writing teacher for psychiatric patients on the locked wards of the Payne Whitney Clinic for 4 years, and now as a lecturer in psychiatry at Weill Cornell Medical College in New York, where I teach a seminar for young doctors, psychiatric residents, I've witnessed the therapeutic effects of emotionally driven writing on patients and physicians alike. The students are required to read a text, a poem, or passage from a larger work, and respond to it in writing. A discussion follows. Both the patients and the doctors have been surprised by the words that appear, words that become vehicles for understanding what they had not understood before. I've written and lectured about these effects and collaborated with researchers working on reading and writing therapies. The theories for why people get better are diverse and often constrained by narrow models, but the effects have been empirically demonstrated. Effects which include improved immune and liver function and a better mood. Writing is not the cure for either mental illness or the hardships of psychiatry as a discipline, but it is an avenue to be pursued as one therapy among others. I am not naive. I recognize that as writers, we often watch as market forces drown what we write, that ambiguity, hybrid thought, and complexity of all kinds are jettisoned for the accessible and simplistic. I also know that many of us are haunted by destructive stereotypes that create perceptions of our texts that denigrate them, and that some languages reach much further than others, including my own, the language in which I am delivering this talk. Freedom of expression means fighting for persecuted writers. It means standing up for both the satanic verses and its author. It also means understanding that right-wing forces scream free speech 1 minute and ban books the next. It means a subtle understanding of the uses of words and how they manipulate emotions. It means distinguishing between symbolic and real violence. It means trying to penetrate how symbolic violence becomes real violence. Because I am living in a country where the threat of authoritarianism is real and close. Because, despite my comfortable position in the social hierarchy, its ugly rhetoric poisons my everyday life. Because I am afraid of what will happen, I cannot afford naivete. Words have power, both destructive and emancipating. We write. We must continue to write with feeling in the spirit of polyphony and difference and conflicting views and greater democracy against the myriad forces that would prefer we remain silent. A luta continua. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Siri Hustvedt, for this deep and critical reading of the complexity of the power of words. Thank you so much.
And we can't afford naivete either. And I want to invite to the stage those people who are writing truth and honesty with full awareness. 3 contemporary Ukrainian writers, Lesyk Panasiuk, Daryna Gladun, and Andrey Kurkov. The conversation of the importance of acknowledging Ukrainian literature in its own rights will be moderated by Jenny Aschenbrenner, one of the sharpest voices in Swedish literature critique and cultural journalism. Ukrainian literature set free. Stage is yours, Jenny.
Thank you very much. It's such a it's such a great honor to be here at this fantastic congress, and it's such a great honor to lead this talk with you. It's going to be on the topic of the importance of literature in wartime, the role of literature in wartime, and specifically, of course, during this Ukrainian war that you all experience right now as authors. You had an introduction, but it was speaking to Lesyk Panasiuk, which is a poet. You're a poet and translator and also an artist. Welcome to this talk. And Daryna Gladun, also a poet and a performer and a translator. And Andrey Kurkov, a novelist, many novels behind you, and also the vice president of the Ukrainian PEN.
President.
The president, sorry,
Yes, yes.
then I misunderstood.
Vice President is also here.
Okay, I'm so sorry about that. Yeah, we will talk about the importance of Ukrainian literature and also the importance of the world acknowledging and recognizing the autonomy of the Ukrainian literature and the complexity and the depths of Ukrainian literature. And this hasn't always been the case. And if I take just Sweden as example, we have very few Ukrainian authors translated into Swedish, with Andrey Kurkov as one of the exceptions. This is changing now. The understanding of the importance of the rich Ukrainian literary scene is growing. And right now we published the Swedish PEN together with the Ariel Publishing House has published this collection of texts, all written by Ukrainian writers this last year. So right from the voices from a war is the undertitle, and that's exactly what it is. And Daryna, Gladun and Lesyk, Panasiuk, you've both participated with text in this one. But if we just start out with your current situation, where are you? I know you both come from Bucha, and you had, of course, to leave this place. Where are you living right now? And
now I'm living in Khmelnytsky. It is a city in the western part of Ukraine, more safety place. Yeah.
And
right now,
Daryna?
I'm staying in the US. I'm studying at Dartmouth College. I'm very grateful to them and also to European institutions that supported me from the very beginning of war, such as Potsdam University in Germany and IWM in Vienna, Austria, who supported me with scholarships, fellowships, and accommodation.
I think we'll come back to how it is to keep on writing from exile. But Andrey Kurkov, I know you've been traveling the world basically since the war started. Could you tell us a bit about that?
Well, we moved actually with my wife in the end of February to Uzhhorod, western Ukraine, Transcarpathian region. Then our youngest son immediately went back to Kiev and was there almost all the time. Now our older children are in Kiev. I'm on the road. My car is in Berlin. My wife is in London. But we are meeting from time to time. We were together in Norway a week ago, and we will meet soon actually in Lisbon, and we'll go back to Berlin and drive to Ukraine.
And what is the purpose of your travels?
Most actually, I'm talking about situation in Ukraine, of course, about Ukrainian literature, and I have a book just out in English, The Diary of Invasion. Actually, it's a collection of my essays written from the end of December last year till 15th of July about life during the war in Ukraine and about many other Ukraine-related issues.
If you then talk a bit about what kind of texts you do write in wartime, you have both written with different words in this collection of texts how your language have changed during the war. Daryna, Gladun, can you tell us more about that?
Before the war, I was writing before I had this first-hand war experience. I was writing about the war with metaphors. My words were way too abstract and sophisticated as I see them now. And since the 24th of February, my lines are straightforward, and I tend to be very precise in how I describe both the victims of war and the people who invaded Ukraine, Russian soldiers and Russian armed forces, and people who committed crimes on the territory of Ukraine.
But do you feel that there was a choice you made, that it was important to be clearer and more direct, or was it just the language that kind of came out of experience since the war?
I feel that it's not only the language that has changed by the realm itself. I believe that there are two different realms, war realm and peace realm, and some words have completely changed their meanings once the war realm came to my life. For instance, collaboration, which used to be just a word to describe how me and Lesyk write our poetry and make performances, right now has a different meaning. And occupation, which used to be just the position you are at work, it's now like the primary meaning of the word has changed. Therefore, the reality has changed and the language has to adapt.
So what is the collaboration for you now?
Collaboration is the cooperation of people with the enemy, I believe. Like of Ukrainian people with Russian troops to help Russian troops invade Ukraine. So the meaning of that is not pleasant. Therefore, I don't call our work together with Lesyk a collaboration anymore. I speak of us as a duet, work duet, and that's it.
So it has totally shifted. Lesyk, what would you say have changed in your writing since the war started?
I felt the need of dialogue, of new language, and I started to I tried to find a new language every...
Sorry, maybe we should get a new microphone, and maybe I could ask you, Andrey, Kurkov, in the meanwhile. I read somewhere in an interview that you said that there's no place for fiction in the wartime.
Well, for me, unfortunately, yes, because I interrupted my work on my novel on the 24th of February, and since then, actually, I tried 2 times to come back to working on the novel, and I failed, because you cannot get this detached from the reality. I mean, writing fiction means actually existing in 2 worlds at the same time, invented world and your reality. And here you cannot leave your reality because you want to check the news, especially news from the front lines, every hour. You want to be in touch with your friends and your family. You are caring what is happening. So, I mean, to go towards fiction, it's actually going away from the reality. You cannot afford it anymore.
Okay. So what have you been writing instead?
Well, mostly articles, essays, speeches, talks. Unfortunately, no poetry, because I stopped writing poetry when I was 24. I thought it is actually quite bad for health, because when we were young and we were writing poems, we were always reading it to each other while drinking beer and wine.
Okay, so you had to stop with the poetry. Yes. For your health, health reasons. So you're both poets, but if you maybe turn back to the question of how your writing has changed since the war started.
I'll try. I'm trying to invite new language by myself and with Daryna. Sometimes we describe that we don't have words to tell about what happened. And sometimes we speak with our readers without text. We start to write some visual poetry and combine it with text.
The fact that you do write poetry, and it's a question for both of you, do you think that, not novels, do you think that that form of writing still is useful to express what's going on during the war and what your experience is, since you're still writing poetry? Is it a good form of literature for...
As Daryna told before, this is a new reality, and the language should adaptate to this new reality. So people should have this new language to speak, to understand themselves, and poets and writers try to give them this new language.
As a poet, I may say that I use poetry and write about war poetry because that's what I usually do. I did that during the peacetime, I go on doing that during wartime. And for me, poetry is not actually the choice I've made due to war. That's the choice I've made probably 10 years ago. When I write, I do that to communicate to people. That's why I share my poetry online via social media, and it reaches out to the reader in seconds. The reader has changed. Before the 24th of February, I've never ever got the feedback from people who are very distant from literature. Some of them haven't read anything like any literature since they graduated from colleges. Therefore, when they see poetry, they often say that, oh, that's something new, that's unexpected on social media. But for me, they are reading what we write is the answer to their own demand on redefining themselves as Ukrainians. Poetry itself is a relatively small genre. You don't need a lot of place and a lot of time to write it and to read it. You don't need to have this ton of knowledge to decode it often. And as I've said before, my language of the language of my poems is now very simple. Therefore, it reaches more people, and that's why I see the purpose of my writing in that.
Andrey, what would you say is the purpose of keeping on writing also during wartime? Even though you don't write fiction right now, you still keep on writing the Journal of the War.
Well, Daryna said that, I mean, communication is very important, especially literary and spiritual communication. People are looking for words of support, words of understanding, explanations. Actually, they are looking for somebody who will explain their state and the state of the country, because very often people are not able to diagnose their own state. And in this sense, actually, poetry is very important because, I mean, poetry is like an injection of energy and injection of thoughts into listener's mind. I mean, I would compare readers of novels to electric cars. They need a lot of time to charge one novel. And in the wartime, you don't have a lot of time. You are always in a hurry.
So there is time for the articles and for the poetry. Yeah. But do you see like the purpose and your role as writers in different ways right now, as especially for like the Ukrainian people, or to communicate with the surrounding world and try to explain?
Both are important, actually. I mean, between 2014 and 2022, lots of writers, Ukrainian writers, were going, for example, to Donbas area, and there were dozens and dozens of literary evenings and discussions to which not only pro-Ukrainian patriots would come, but also people with some sympathies to Russia. And I remember actually that in the beginning they were not coming. You would come and you would meet only the patriots and the activists and those who are really obviously pro-Ukrainian. But later actually also other part of the population was attracted to this because I mean they wanted to know the idea, the opinion, what writers are writing about. So I mean if you silence the writers inside Ukraine in the wartime, it's like national identity is left unprotected. I mean, you have no attachment to the culture because, I mean, this is the easiest attachment to the national culture through the literature of the country.
What are your views on that? What the purpose of, or the role of the literature and your writing during wartime?
Literature is the variety of sceneries you can live without your own experience. It can give you opportunity to not be scared because the fear paralyzes you. But you should do something immediately. The literature gives you this opportunity to don't be scared.
And does ask you, Daryna, Gladun, does it work like that also when you write? What purpose does the writing fill for you during this period?
Well, I would actually be lying if I say that I write having in mind these strong connections with the readers, etc. For me, it's first of all the my own tries to rethink what has just happened and to put this war trauma and war experience, both gained personally and from the news, into something outside of me, to locate these thoughts somewhere and to not be too attached to them. However, when I finish my first draft, the reader comes to my mind and I check everything in order not to, considering the readers, in order not to hurt them even more with my words.
But do you write thinking about the Ukrainian readers or thinking about the readers outside Ukraine when you do your editing of your writing?
I think of both actually, because our poetry has been translated into 25 world languages or even more right now. Therefore, it's hard not to think of people in Bangladesh who are reading our poems or about people in Sweden who are reading our poems and the messages they may get. And as Lesyk has said, it is crucial for us to be precise about the war experience we are speaking about, to name everything as it should be named, not to be too abstract in our poems, at the same time not to hurt people. The things with these scenarios that Lesyk was talking about actually are things that saved our lives, because we've been reading about the war a lot. From Ida Fink's journey, we got this idea that if you don't act immediately, you may die. And during this war time or in this war reality, your action is crucial. And you don't have time to analyze everything. You just have to act as fast as you can. Therefore, I have that in mind when I write. I hope that within our poetry, it is as clear as possible.
You are all I think, Andrey, Kurkov, since you've been traveling so much, I guess you've been writing a lot from abroad and not from Ukraine. Does it change anything from you to write like in exile or apart from your country?
No, I'm in touch actually with lots of people in different cities of Ukraine, including those who live under occupation now. So I'm checking on them sometimes every morning. And no, I mean, until end of June I was coming and going, so I was actually traveling from Ukraine and back to Ukraine. And I mean, I don't see any difference in my text written inside Ukraine and outside Ukraine, because the topic remains the same and the attitude remains the same. And also I wanted to add that actually one of the tasks probably of the literature, of Ukrainian literature today, is to be a remedy also to fight hate speech, to deal with the radicalized part of the traumatized population, with war veterans, with the IDPs and refugees. And they should be also addressed, even if they are abroad, as about 7 million Ukrainians are now abroad.
But has it been important for you to have like a base left in Ukraine?
Sorry?
Has it been important for you to have, you know, you said you had, until June, you traveled back to Ukraine. Why did you want to travel back that long during
Well, you know,
wartime?
I have been traveling in last 27 years, always 6 months abroad, 6 months at home. And for me, it was always a special celebration to come back home, even after 1 week trip. So, I mean, to have a home and to know that you have a home is very important. My neighbors in the countryside where we have a house are sending me regularly photo of my house in order for me to see that the house is there. It's not bombed, it's not shelled, although the village next door was destroyed, Stavishe. And this is very important to me. I belong to this house, to this village, to Kyiv, to Ukraine, and I should go back every time I can to the place I belong to.
Lesyk, what is your experience of writing from exile and the connection with Ukraine?
I'm in Ukraine now, and I don't feel like I'm in exile. I live with Daryna's parents, and it is like home for me also. Time after time I'm back to Bucha because our apartment is looted, destroyed, and we try to repair it. But I don't feel like I'm in exile, something like that.
But you have
Ukraine.
been, and I was just wondering if, you know, it has something happened to your writing when you being in the country or outside the country?
It is the first time then I came from Ukraine to another country, and here is a lot of events, and I don't write anything.
But I wanted also to talk a bit about the fact that I was saying in the beginning that Ukrainian literature hasn't always been able to reach out into the world, and not that many Ukrainian writers have been translated into different languages before. How important is that? What impact has that had? Has that had any impact on the political development, do you think?
Well, I mean, Europe didn't know and ignored Ukraine because Europe didn't read Ukrainian literature. In fact, the paradox is that Ukrainian classical literature is not translated into European languages. And if you read today's literature, you read it without context. Because, I mean, everybody knows Russian history, Russian literature. Everybody, when reads, for example, Pelevin, he consciously connects him to Dostoevsky, to other Russian classical writers. I mean, you don't have enough understanding of Ukrainian culture and Ukrainian literature to appreciate today's literature. So the war made publicity for Ukraine, but Ukraine is paying huge price for this publicity, and we would prefer not to have this publicity and you to translate Ukrainian literature, classical and contemporary, without war, without sort of publicity.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so it has an enormous impact, I understand that. But would you say that it is changing now, though, that the Ukrainian literature, you said you were translated into 25 languages. Would you say that there is something changing right now when it comes to the world's view on Ukrainian literature?
Yes, but I totally agree with Andrey. I'd better be translated into less languages and never came here, never came to Berlin and to Vienna and everywhere, and to be in Bucha and live my life.
I just wanted to end with the concept of literature as hope, as we heard in the opening speech. Do you think that right now can literature, Ukrainian literature, in any way carry hope for the Ukrainian people? Lesyk.
Yes, I think yes, because we saw the interest of Ukrainian people to Ukrainian literature after the beginning of the war on the February of 24. They started read it, started share it, started write it. They feel that they need this Ukrainian literature to discover themselves, to discover the Ukrainian identity.
Well, I can add actually that statistically, the sales of books in Ukraine now, after 6 months and more of the war, came to 80% of pre-war sales. People are trying to buy new Ukrainian books in Ukrainian to read. And this is in the time when most of the print works are bombed and destroyed. And actually one of the print works centers and publishing centers is Kharkiv, which is shelled every day. So, I mean, literature is playing the role. Literature is helping the society to stay sane and to stay defiant.
Thank you very much. Andrey Kurkov, Daryna Gladun, and Lesyk.
Thank you. What a vibe, Lesyk, just crushing all the techniques. And literature as anti-fear tool, poetry as electric cars. I got a lot of great metaphors from today's talk. But the main thing is how crucial it is to be precise about words, I believe. As Daryna said, words which have power to hurt and to heal or to create a new home when it's needed. Thank you, Jenny, for helping to set Ukrainian literature free. Thank you for your input, dear panelists. Let's thank them.
And before we close this opening ceremony, we would like to highlight a wonderful collaboration. Together with Fristad Uppsala, as a part of the ICON network, and David Isaac Library, we are proud to today let you know that a selection of banned books and those strong, powerful voices supporting them are on display in around 20 venues, libraries and bookstores around Uppsala.
And David Isaac Library in Malmö collects and preserves books that have been banned, burned, or censored. They are here with us today, and we'll have a table outside of the main hall for you to visit and perhaps leave a book you have brought with you.
So, Olga, what's next for our delegates?
I am such a wrong person to ask. Hard work, obviously, okay? So, dear delegates, after the short break, please join the committee meetings you assigned for. You can find the room numbers in your programs. Please remember that today we are holding gadget-free meetings. If you have some, please leave them with our volunteers in room number 11 upstairs. And strict page control policy is to be applied as well.
And the public program continues. Tomorrow we will bring you panels on hate speech, on disappearance, and on cultural rights in time of war and post-conflict.
This is not something you would like to miss. So, see you tomorrow, the same place, a bit later time. And thank you for your time and attention. And see you at our Power of Words 28th Annual Pan International Congress, officially opened.